Everyone, this is my big day. I can finally stand here and talk. This is also very important because even my 6-year-old daughter is very bored with my environmental humanities stories. So I can come here and I have 90 minutes to tell anything I find important when it comes to environmental humanities to a bunch of very bright people who are going to shape humanity's future after I'm dead. So this is an important moment. I can make my impact if I try hard. And this is what I'm going to do and try. There may be some questions on the way, or you might want to have a comment, or I'm going to have a question to you. There is the catch boxes up there, and there is a mic down here, so please be courteous and help each other to access the mics. All right, this is what I would like to talk about today. I would like to talk about perspectives and roles of humans and non-humans. I very much like the topics that are centered around forest, reclamation, economy. In Europe, and a particular part of Europe that I'm going to talk about. And I very much love stories from the past. Stories of non-human and human agents. So, yeah, I'm not going to talk a lot about technology, but, or maybe I'm going to talk about technology too. And I would like to end this session with hope. Raise up hope for the future, because I truly believe that what is happening to me and people who are older than me, it matters not much anymore. We are halfway down to the grave anyway. But you and the generations that's coming after you, that matters a lot. Because those decisions that you are going to make and the generations after you are going to make, that are going to definitely shape our interaction with the non-human. And I think history is a great tool to do that. History is not a very great tool to predict the future in very detailed ways. I remember I had this discussion just before the invasion began in the spring, and I had this heated discussion with a colleague, and I said, no. I've been to Russia many times. I did my research in Russia. I think I know the country somewhat well. There's no money for an invasion. And 6 hours later, the invasion began. So history was not very good predicting specifically what would unfold. But what we see these weeks, the tendency, the big picture, history seems to predict the big picture quite accurately, that the invasion slowly stopped and now it's redrawing, and we kind of already see who's gonna have to pull out. So history was maybe not that dumb of a help. And after the session, I would like to kindly invite you to continue these conversations and discussions, because this is, well, most importantly and most selfishly, it makes me happy to have conversations. But I think this is really the way we can move from one place to another, and we can shape the future for coming generations. All right, so I start with this quote. Roderick Nash, environmental historian, white, male, like most of them in the 1960s and 70s, first generation of my discipline that was invented about 60, 50 years ago. Very few women in that cohort, very few people from minorities, very few people from outside of the global north. So Roderick Nash, with the pipe, with the macho attitude, said, maybe not so stupid and dumb thing. It is really not the wilderness that needs management. It has been doing quite well, after all, for a couple of billion years. But people. And I think this is very much encompassing the thought that I would like to plant a seed, and the seed blooming a little bit in the coming 90 minutes when we discuss the environmental humanities perspective. So I start with a definition. What is environmental humanities? We don't know yet, but we have a faint idea of the perspective that is uniting a number of disciplines that are sharing this perspective of environmental humanities. From an environmental humanities perspective, the state can be a dangerous force. And I think that is a very distinctive perspective. Working for the benefit of the powerful, always holding the potential to crush dissidents and subalterns, and observers must remain vigilant so that state authority remains with proper bounds. And this observation is not for the state entirely. But nevertheless, I think the point here is that we always have to look out from an environmental humanities perspective. There is not many answers maybe in that environmental humanities perspective, but there's a lot of questions, a lot of open-ended questions that needs to be filled in. Maybe we are not going to be able to fill in those gaps, but the people who are coming later on, they might be able, or maybe they won't, but at least they stop, they ponder, they think, they lament, and then they change course. I think that's already the impact that we may want to look for. So there has been this strong criticism against the state, but do we see some sort of interrelation when it comes to the state and sciences in general? And from an environmental humanities perspective, yes, we do. There is this interaction between the scientists, and I'm going to give you loads of examples. I'm going to fill the next coming hour with those examples when state and scientists cooperate together, united by visions that are shared by both groups of persons. And so the Western perception of science is, and this is what we have also heard during this course, so I'm very happy that this lecture is incorporated now in this course, because we may hear different voices as well, but maybe those voices are not very heavily represented in what we have been listening to in the past weeks. So Western science thinks that things may vary from place to place, but not in a way that matters. There is this universal phenomena, right? Localities, particulars, context, they're just details, like it doesn't matter you do your research in Siberia or the Antarctica or in Kangasala, Finland, it's the same thing, right? We are using the same universal tools of science to assess those problems, to analyze and to come up with new ideas. And science is this tool, this universal tool that we are using, sorting, and this allows this special access for humans to seek these universal truths opened up by science. Whenever I go to Yle, I'm fascinated by this idea. Whenever there is a science communication by the Finnish broadcaster or any state-owned broadcaster in Europe, there is always this idea, the universal truth of the expert. I love this because this is what I research. How all those ideas propagated by experts posed upon the environment failed ridiculously in the past. And I love those ideas because they're so powerful, so hopeful. There is so much hope in all those wonderful technical tools that humans invented. Now, of course, we laugh at them because they seem ridiculous. But at the time, they really, truly believed in them. And then you already know the end of the story because you are after the end of the story. You already watched the movie, right? You're just rewinding it. They failed. So every time I see a wonderful communication about a new scientific achievement, I'm like, I have seen that movie already many, many times. Yeah, so I offer you this metrics, right? We use metrics for self-evaluation. So this is the metrics I'm offering you to contemplate with. There is the state that we already mentioned, and there is the scientists we already mentioned. And just to be fair with the state, because I started with the criticism towards state authorities, businesses and business goals can be just as controversial and powerful than goals of the state administration. But what is in the middle of all this that comes together is the non-human actors that I would like to visit you during this lecture. I would like to offer these different perspectives that we are looking at and seeing what happened in the past and contemplating on that. I'm not going to offer you any fixes, any solutions. I will have no agenda. How can we solve the climate and environmental crisis? I will have no idea at the end of this talk how we can make the world better. Oh, that's not true. A little bit of idea. But I cannot give you any ready-made instant package to follow. I do not have that toolkit. I do not believe I have that toolkit. But what I can do is to offer you interesting questions and stories to think of. So Western science, as represented by experts, is based on this assumption that the natural phenomena and the unnatural ones, like pollution, are universal. We always talk about this, right? Pollution is universal. We are doing it. We humans are instigating pollution. We are creating all that pollution. But are we in this together? And are we in this equally? Is this for everyone? Is this for all of us? The Western way of knowing is part of this very specific heritage of social norms, beliefs, ethical values, and political systems, technologies, and legal structures and traditions that we often do not reflect on. We are being brought up by an education system that varies from place to place, but the bottom line is the goals are very similar in all those different countries, and the tools are very similar too. And we often do not reflect on that. We often do not reflect on the basis of those assumptions. And this is what also science is telling us. So I brought you a number of books, but I would start with the first one. It's a poetic one. It has been labeled many times as too emotional, and the author Rachel Carson has been labeled as a hysteric, non-scientific, non-rational person. Well, she was a woman, so it was very easy for a lot of male scientists in the 1960s. This is different science, much less. There is no gender equality at university, right? Because there's 75% of the academic workers at this university who are women, and only 40% make it to professorship. And that has nothing to do with merit, I guess. But in the 60s, this was a lot worse, right? And so it was very easy that someone who considers something from a very different perspective than mainstream science is labeled like, yeah, she's just, But as time passed by, her ideas became very influential. In fact, her ideas influenced science so much that entire disciplines were established on the notions that Rachel Carson noticed. What were they? They're very simple things. Just she realized changes in the environment. She didn't take the promise of science, the state, businesses for granted. She just kept her eyes open and realized that something has changed. So what has changed? The area where she lived in the United States became very silent there, hence the title Silent Spring. Here's a quote. There was a strange stillness. The birds, for example, where had they gone? Many people spoke of them, puzzled, disturbed. The feeding stations in the backyards were deserted. The few birds seen anywhere were moribund. They trembled violently and could not fly. It was a spring without voices. On the mornings they had once throbbed with the dawn, chorus of robins, catbirds, dove, jays, wrens, and scores of other bird voices, there was now no sound. Only silence lay over the fields and woods and marsh. Yeah, it's an emotionally charged language. It's not it's not a language of the scientist, right? It's full with noticing something that has been changing and reflecting the feelings inside the author. And so she got into a fight with scientists, right? This is the 1960s. We already know much more about herbicides and pesticides that caused that silence. We already know the end of the story, but they didn't know, and they were very much in disbelief what this woman of this emotional language and historical message was conveying to them. No, DDT is not dangerous. No, it's good. It's good for, don't worry, it's safe. We have so much science that is proving it's safe. It's impossible that DDT is unsafe. So here's food for thought. A short video clip summarizing the views only 60 years ago, a couple of generations ago, the scientist view and Rachel Carson's view. And we could have the first brief discussion after the video if you wish, if you want to reflect on what you have heard in this video.
Ms. Carson maintains that the balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature.
Now, to these people, apparently the balance of nature was something that was repealed as soon as man came on the scene. Well, you might just as well assume that you could repeal the law of gravity. The balance of nature is built of a series of interrelationships between living things and between living things and their environment. You can't just step in with some brute force and change one thing without changing a good many others. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that we must never interfere, that we must not attempt to tilt that balance of nature in our favor. But unless we do bring these chemicals under better control, we are certainly headed for disaster.
Yeah, so what I would like to do now is to go back a little bit in time. I want to take you back in time. I've spent the last couple of decades in soaking back in history. And I was wondering once, like, what does it really mean, right? All those people are dead, it's done, it's all over. It doesn't matter, right? Because it already happened. But on the other hand, I feel it is making sense to spend your life trying to make sense of what humans did in the past, because it does help you to understand, maybe to see the world from very different perspectives. And when you have those different perspectives, the more you have them, perhaps the better assessment you might kind of make of what has been going on. And so here's one book that I very much recommend. It's not a difficult read. The original was published in French, so hence the strange title, I guess, A History of Pollutions in the Industrial Age. It's exactly the same title in French, and The Contamination of the Earth. And this book, Contamination of the Earth, offers a very good social and political history of industrial pollution. It's mapping out trajectories over 3 centuries, from toxic waste of early tanneries to the fossil fuel regime, and the 20th century, the chemicals we just talked about, and especially from the perspective of the role of scientists. So this is my talk about the book to recommend you. But what did it tell me was that scientists have been for centuries in very close contact with the state, with businesses, trying to put forward their ideas. Something we often forget. We often think that scientists are doing what they do for the sake of science, for the improvement of the human condition, to save the world and all that. And this book is just telling you these dozens of stories of scientists who made it, not in the scientific term always, but in terms of money. They just made booming businesses regardless of the human cost, regardless of the social cost, regardless of the environmental cost. They had these great, brilliant, sparkling ideas. They were good businessmen. They had the allies in state administration that is very important in France in the past centuries. And then they just went ahead, regardless of what happened to other humans or the environment. And I think that is very interesting. It's very interesting when you think that we still do have scientists, right? What do they do? And so the other thing I would like to revisit with you today is the role of the state and businesses. I put them together. Why did I do that? Because I have this other recommendation, James C. Scott, Seeing Like a State. When I read this book, I remember my fury. I was very angry. It's like, nah, he doesn't understand. It's a dumb theory. I don't believe in that. I don't agree with him. But you know, the more I contemplated about it, the more I realized that there may be some truth of what Scott has been saying. So Scott condensed that bureaucratic regimes aim to organize their societies according to technocratic principles. He calls it the high modernism. What is a high modernist regime? High modernist regime, for example, the vision of the Soviet Union or its Eastern European satellites, that is a high modernist regime. In these countries, that you might not often think about that probably, but in these countries the roles of the experts was like sacred position. It was like priests of modernity. And when I did my research in Russia, I realized that. I was sometimes asked, questioned, what do I do? I had my domestic ID with me that said, foreign specialist. And I remember this very arrogant person. It's like, where you work? When I was stopped, and I just, oh, where's my ID? There you go. Oh, the priest of modernity. Thank you very much for making a country great. And so Scott very much has that view. And he also maintains that the local knowledge, beyond that universal frame of knowledge, the local knowledge, métis, that's coming from the First Nations of North America, Canada, they do not take this knowledge into account. And it is exactly because of that spectrum of human knowledge that is not taken into the system, just like Rachel Carson's, it's nonsense, right? It's like some indigenous thing. Yeah, let's give them something. But we have to go ahead. In the real world, I have heard that number of times, in the real world, we do things like, like with real science and real tools, and like we play real. And Scott noted that, so it's not just the state, he clarified later on, because I got a little bit upset, that is it just the state? Why do you pick on the state? The state is just one like big set of actors, and then you're leaving out businesses. But this book is about the state, right? So it's about China, it's about Soviet Union, it's about where the state was the most important actor, whereas in many other countries and societies and economies, the state is not per se the most important actor. Okay, so large-scale capitalism, said Scott, is just as much as the agency of homogenization, uniformity, and grids, and heroic simplification of the state, and I might want to get back to that heroic simplification, with the difference that for capitalists, simplification must pay. And I love that sentence. I think it's great, it's brilliant. What is this heroic simplification? Do you want to maybe just throw some ideas on the table? Think about dams, hydropower dams, nuclear power dams, new electric grids. We will make this country have all that electricity grid. It's a big fight, it's a big work, but we will make this country modern, right? Like 100 years ago, this could have been written in some newspaper in like half of the European countries, including this one. Yes, we will make this country interconnected with roads, with railways. There will be great roads everywhere. You can travel from the capital city to a provincial city in a few hours' time. Is it still in the past? It's all gone, right? We are so much better now. We don't do these things. We don't believe in heroic simplification anymore. No. There has been projects that are being revamped by the European Union for the sake of economic progress, right? There has been ideas to build hydropower dams on the lower sections of the Danube because it's very heavily dammed in the upper sections, but not in the middle and the lower sections. And now part of that area belongs to the European Union or countries that are members of the European Union. And new ideas that are like 150 years old and has been used by various regimes, they are being reused. Again, let's build a dam. We will modernize the Danube. It will be like a real river. We can navigate it. We can transport all that coal, all those things from the Black Sea up to Germany or where we want to. Heroic simplification is still very much going on. All right. Yeah, so probably you got the idea that environmental humanities disciplines, including mine, that's environmental history, is questioning the rule and the role of experts and the Western-driven perception of global environmental crisis. And what does it offer? It doesn't offer fixes, right? It doesn't offer Tesla cars. It doesn't offer new cell phones or new technologies. It offers you questions, doubts. And this is what I hope to do with the case studies today. Yes. So I would like to revisit 3 case studies. I hope I will have time for all of them. But if not, at least we can do the first 2. I would like to talk about forests, reclamation, and complex planning. Complex planning is uniting landscapes and uniting elements of the landscapes, like uniting the forest and the swamps and the marshland and the meadows and the agriculture fields and the urban environments. It's uniting everything. It's about total control of the environment or total coexistence, whatever. I hope I will get there. But if not, we can always talk about forestry and reclamation. Why about these 2 things? Because forestry is always good. It's wonderful. It's great. It's green. You go in, you breathe. There is all these good things there. You calm. It's like a bath, right? It's great. It's not only great, but it's also making money. It's making loads of money for many countries. You cut all the timber, you export them, you can build all sorts of things. Forests are brilliant. They are wonderful. We need those forests, right? In Europe, forest has been growing for quite a bit of time. Well, in other parts of the world not, but who cares? Anyway, those places are far away. Hence goes the story oftentimes. And land reclamation, that's sort of the opposite of that story. Why? What's the problem with marshes, wetland? From the perspective of the state, of scientists, and capitalists. We have the matrix, the 3 actors. What is the problem with the swamps?
And they're not, perhaps not as exploitable, except recently with the energy again.
Yeah, it's difficult to use marshlands, right? It's very difficult to use them from the perspective of science, businesses, and the state. And the more you have those, the more trouble you will have. You can't even navigate those places. They are too shallow. You cannot build a road on them because it's wetland. You cannot till them because it's wetland. There is a lot of mosquitoes and malaria and all sorts of sicknesses during the summer. You cannot build their towns or villages because those people will be in danger. They're good for nothing. Maybe there is peat. Okay, you can use peat. So that's the problem with marshlands. Marshlands, in the past hundreds of years, is something that had to be eliminated. And a decent state, any state in European history that thrived to be a modern state, a real state, a winning state, a strong state, that wanted to eliminate the marshlands, that wanted to maintain the forests, because remember what happened with the Romans and the Greeks. They cut down all those forests, and the Phoenicians too, and then they had the ecological crisis, and bummer, the empire was all gone. So you need the forest, eliminate the swamps, make them fertile, make them civilized. And with the elimination of marshlands, you also eliminate barbarism. That is a very deep European story. And I'm going to tell you two examples. First, I get to the forest. So we will see forests in the past from the viewpoint of the state, businesses, and scientists. There we go. Well, forests had very different types of usage in the past than they have today, right? Most of the forests in most European countries, they are plantations, basically. They are to make money, make profit. But it was not per se like that, especially not in the Middle Ages when all that, those various rights and very complex legal systems specifically put limits on the use of forest depending on its owner. And of course, hunting was always a right for the royals or nobles. But the local residents, they always had some sort of access to at least part of those forested landscapes, and they could use them in a complex way, not just to cut timber to heat their huts, but to collect forest products, to have their bunch of pigs going into the oak forest and eat the acorn and make them fat and so forth. So the forest always had this kind of complex use. But here's one problem. If you want to build a successful forest economy, you cannot have all those people coming into your forest. You cannot have all those pigs roaming around there. It's very difficult, right? When you're like clear-cutting a forest, it's very difficult to have like thousands of pigs who are eating acorn nearby the tractors. So instead of that multiple use, complex use of forests, this has changed. Forest as very important, very significant source of resource had to be limited. So on the left side, you see forest crimes from the 18th century. These are forest crimes, people who did wrong, did things in the forest that they were not allowed. Like maybe they collected some forest products or had their domestic animals feeding in the forest in a restricted section. As you can see on the other side of that image, a lot of pigs. Because forest had, from the 17th and 18th centuries in European history, different designated use. It had to provide high timber. And those high timber trees had to grow because all these new successful business ventures in the Netherlands, in the UK, and else, and all the aspiring new states, they were building up these vast naval forces for war, yes, but also for commerce. Remember, It has to pay. Simplification must pay. And this paid. This is one of the foundations of our civilization that we are enjoying so unquestioned today. But not just the big ships. You need it for forest timber, for anything and everything, right? For construction. Just I'm putting up these images just to imagine the sheer volume of timber used for construction purposes of pet projects and symbolic projects, or just, you know, wealthy buildings in Central Europe. And just the interior. Now, this building is in Hildesheim, and this is the interior. It's a trendy restaurant, so if you are happening to be in Hildesheim, you might want to go into the restaurant and lament about the amount of wood that had to be used, cut down, to build this pretty amazing house, right? But also for transportation. You had to have wood, because that was the basis of not just the sea transportation, but also the land-based transportation. So here is a workshop image from the 18th century, from the French encyclopedia of making these wheels out of wood. And wood as fuel, you know, that's the ultimate fuel. Even for iron making, wood was, charcoal was the ultimate fuel in the continent, in the European continent. In some parts, in German-speaking areas, up to almost the mid-19th centuries. It was not coal. It was wood that had to be used. So wood had so much use, and then you had more people to feed. And then you had all these aspiring economies and states and businesses who wanted to grow, wanted to extract this very precious raw material. So that definitely caused some problems, right? You must, in this kind of situation, you must control your resource base. You cannot have the local people wandering around with their pigs. You must have a system, and you must punish those who are not keeping that system intact, hence the forest crimes. And so the German story is probably the most notable, but this has been exported to all over Europe. And, oh yeah, this is just the industrial scale, like, yeah. But this is the slide I would want to continue with. So this leads us to a concept. The first European concept of sustainability. It's so human, right? We have an idea, a beautiful idea, sustainability. That's a positive thing. Sustainability, yes. We all love the earth. We want to keep it. We all love the forests. We want to keep them. And so we do not want to have those nasty clear cuts, right? That's bad. We want to have this continuous forest cover. This is good. This is very good. Well, it's very good for business, right? Because you need those big trees for the big ships and for the big buildings. And it's very good for the owner because then you can make a lot of money. And it's not so good for the local people because if you have quasi-intensified forest production, then you have a very, very tight and secure system, and you might not be able to access this very important resource that you needed for heating, for construction, for a number of things. You need it in your everyday life. But this resource has a designated future. It's going down to Amsterdam or Antwerp. It's going to be a big ship. You don't touch it, you local peasant. It's not for you. We will sell it. And that is the origin of Dauerwald, or Nachhaltigkeit. The first idea, the first scientific idea of sustainability. And scientific forestry, as it was born in the 18th century, it conquered European sciences. It was exported. It was not just exported in Europe, it was exported, yes, to Russia. Russian forestry became huge by the end of the 19th century. They had wonderful quasi-spiritual scientific, a great array of ideas, but also in the Habsburg Empire, it influenced a number of different scientific disciplines and schools, especially because much of the education was in German, so you didn't even have to translate the text. You could just import a notable professor from a German-speaking area, and then there you go. You got your export of sustainability. But guess what? It went also global via the German colonial empire, and also the Brits adopted much of the scientific forestry disciplines or ideas in India. Yes, that's a beautiful story of the first sustainability ideas. To keep the forest intact, to not to be touched by local communities, to not to be used for anything else than trees should be used for, to increase the control of the owner, of businesses, and the state. All right, we are halfway. I keep 2-3 minutes break, and then we continue it from here. All right, ready to go? Still hanging on? Good. Okay, let's see wetlands. That's a different story. Wetlands is not much business opportunity. You don't really see businesses coming into wetlands that often. But you see the state coming in to the wetlands and wanting to gain control. Because the more wetlands you have, the less control you have over your lands, over your country, over your domains that you seek to control. And I'm very intrigued about that idea of control. There's always this idea of control, more control. And I want to have that seed planted that we are going forward. All right, so this is it. And I purposefully left the bottom, on the up. Conquests from barbarism. Conquest from barbarism. And this image is the colonization. The image is scanned from a book, so. It's a colonization of a new village, somewhere in Prussia in the 18th century. But I have a different image. Maybe that is, this is a little bit better. Yeah. Muscle power, the work of hydrological improvement in 18th century Prussia. I love that word, improvement. That area, that swampy area somewhere in Prussia, currently Poland most probably, or Kaliningrad area, had to be improved because it was a lot of wetlands. It was very difficult to navigate for a state. There might have been human communities in that wetland, but those human communities couldn't be controlled, and maybe the tax couldn't even be collected properly. Definitely there were no very good access to those areas by ship or on road at a time, and this is the 18th century, so there's no railway. And there's all those mosquitoes and malaria, and malaria has been present in Europe until very much the 19th century, until all these swamps have been drained. So from a scientific perspective, it's not even a question that you want to drain these, because it's just the improvement of the human condition, of human society. And yes, so who was the father? The person who was obsessed with draining Prussia was Frederick the Great, and now he's visiting this new colony, and I love this word also, colony, this internal colonization, because it's very much the story of my homeland. It's a new country. Wherever I look, I'm from Hungary, it's a new place. It's not just multicultural, it's not just a lot of ethnic groups. I have like probably 0% of Hungarian genes. My family is coming from all over the place. It's very typical. But it's also a lot of new areas, a lot of new settlements after the reclamation works of the 19th century. Much of Hungary didn't even exist before the 19th century because it was seasonally flooded. And so the new colony, colonizing your own country in Europe, that notion, I think that's very powerful. You are conquering all that land that used to be, from a state perspective, completely useless. You couldn't till the land, you couldn't tax people there, you couldn't produce any produce, you couldn't have any industry, you couldn't have anything except malaria. And that is not very good for a state, especially for a modern one. So this was very important, and Frederick the Great, he was just obsessed not only making Prussia great for the first time, but also, or again, depends on the perspective, but also making Prussia a very thriving, efficient, undrained, reclaimed state. And again, just like German forestry, this proved to be a very powerful concept for many other monarchs who were looking for the same sort of solutions and success that Frederick possessed. And the Habsburgs, who were like losing out already in the 18th century, they were feeling that, okay, this is going to be ending soon or later. They very much look forward to tools that the Prussians were using and learning from that process to make their empire more efficient from a state perspective. Because normal rivers, they are unregulated, right? We can't really find them anymore in Europe. So you have to go, I don't know, you have to go to Bulgaria or Ukraine, probably Finland too. That's a good example. I didn't think about that, but there's not very many significant rivers in this country. But when you think of continental Europe, there's not many unregulated rivers anymore because they are a problem. They are as problematic as marshes, right? Unregulated rivers and marshes, they go hand in hand. This is how they look like. There is no navigable route. It's very difficult to navigate them in places. This is why the European Union wants to regulate the lower sections of the Danube, because it's unregulated. So it's not good for business. It's not good for the state to oversee the lands, the newly claimed lands. We need internal colonization, just as Peter the Great, yes. Peter and Frederick the Great and Joseph II, they did. Yes, so what they do with the rivers to tame them, right? This is again a word that is just to tame a river, to seek more control over that river, to use it for your own purpose as a human. They are doing these cuts. So I have a large cursor, and probably I can show it to you. So this used to be the old riverbed, curly, and now they're just making this cut right here, right? They're making the cut, they're building some sort of a levee here and here too. That's going to be like more like I don't know, like a lake, and then this one too. We don't need those. We need to shorten the river to make it flow faster. And that's good for navigation. That's good for commerce, and that's also good for floods, because the floods will be just go downstream fast. And the Rhine, again a German example, the Rhine was really the stereotypical example of how to tame a river. As you can see on your left, this is the course of the Rhine at the end of the 18th century. It's not very good for navigation, right? It's not very good for business. It is the major river of commerce in Western Europe up to today, right? It must be like a canal. It must be like a highway. It must be like a freeway for ships. It cannot be like curly all the way. It has to be deep enough. It has to be fast enough. It has to be safe enough to navigate, so it can maintain good business rates. This Rhine is not good for the state and not good for the businesses. But luckily, we are very lucky, because we have all that science. We have all those scientists, the hydrologists, the geographers, the topographers, the God knows what, who will help us to make this river navigable, who will help us to build our wonderful country, our new empire. We will be great. And we will have this really straight Rhine that's serving our needs. Yeah, non-human agents, come on. That's not a question. Yeah, so this is what is remaining. You see a fairly straight riverbed here, and then these are the kind of the dead arms that are lakes. They're good for fishing, probably. So we have talked a lot about the German case, and now we are navigating to my favorite locality in the world, and that is the Carpathian Basin. I love this because it is really a perfect place to study the environment for a number of good reasons. One of the reasons is, I think, because it's very much like a big bathtub. And bathtubs are always interesting to research. I love bathtubs. I have a couple of projects on ecological systems that were conceived by scientists as bathtubs, and they have been building those tubs for hundreds of years. One of them is a small lake down here, Lake Balaton or Plattensee. It is a bathtub. It has been built. The shoreline has been cemented almost entirely now and has been built over different political regimes, different economic regimes as a money-making bathtub. It's a wonderful story. So I hope that I can go back to that research soon. All right. On the fringes, you have the Carpathian Mountains, and right in the middle, you have a vast steppe-like grasslands. That's the puszta, right? Everyone is riding horses, and well, I don't know much about that. I was born on the fringes of the mountains, right here somewhere in the mountain areas. So I don't know much about the puszta, but I think it's a very fascinating area where you can not only research what we have talked about in the German or German-speaking context, or like Central European context, but you can also add new nuances, and that nuance is very much in the heart of my research, and that is various minorities, history of minorities, nationalism, nation building, and various ethnic groups. So what is exciting about this bathtub is that on the fringes, where you have the relatively high mountains right here. It's not a very good map, but anyway, you can probably make sense that on the fringes you have the high mountains, and there you go. You have the different colors on the ethnographic map, and that's different minorities. So here you have the Slovaks with some German-speaking enclaves, and there you go. Here you have the Ruthenians, who are not Ukrainians. They have a language. They do have a language. That was the language of my ancestors. It's somewhere between Polish, Slovak, and Ukrainian. And there you have the Romanians down here. So a lot of ethnic groups. So you have this social, ecological tension that has been brewing up in Central Europe. On top of that, there is this wonderful, like if you imagined like a layer cake from Vienna, right? There's all these layers: ecological destruction, the state actors, business actors, economic needs, modernization, same layers. And then on the top of that, you have this wonderful Schlagsahne, and that is the minorities and the ethnic question that makes it real like a barrel of gunpowder to me. I think this is very interesting. And I will, hopefully I will have time. I have some time. I can talk about it. Yeah, so this is a beautiful landscape in this area, very close to Budapest, the capital of Hungary. And this is an urban, not urban forest, but a forest that is very close to urban environments. And you see ladies at the end of the 19th century enjoying the beautiful landscape. But there was already a lot of threats around, because many of these hills, they were either urbanized, becoming part of elite neighborhoods where many of the owners had their own villas, or they were turned into plantations of apricot, for example, something that could be sold at the urban markets. So the city dwellers of this town of Hungary, they already saw the environmental conditions, the worsening environmental conditions firsthand. But they were also concerned about the world. They also knew about Amazonia. So this is a random summary of a random newspaper from a totally insignificant place that you don't even need to know where it is, somewhere in the Carpathian Basin, like small town, doesn't matter. 1860, and they are lamenting about deforestation. They're lamenting about the deforestation that has been going on in the Carpathian Basin, the things that people noticed in the area of Budapest, but they are also lamenting about what's happening on the fringes, and they are connecting it with the global deforestation, and this is 1860 again, and they say trees stood in the way of the plow in Brazil, and as soon as people began to till the land, they are immediately becoming hostile to the forest. There is this forest hostility, right? Devastating impacts of soil erosion and loss of land fertility fueled deforestation in the Americas, in Southeast Asia, in Australia. The newspapers, 160 years ago, they're filled with these stories, these horrific stories. What's going on in the outer world, in North America, in Brazil, in the Amazonas area? But the same thing was going on in their very country, in the Carpathians, because the country was heavily modernizing. All those stories I talked about in the late 18th and early 19th century in the Central European context, with very little delay, arrived to the Habsburg Empire and especially to the eastern part of the Habsburg Empire. So that's the Hungarian kingdom. And there you have all those nationalities living up in the hills, and then you have all those goals, the same goals of modernization, the same ideas of science, the same context in so many ways that we have talked about. But here you have a lot more different actors. It's not just the local communities against the powerful, like in the Central European context, but it's local communities who speak different languages, coming from very different cultural backgrounds, and the powerful. I think this is, from my own perspective, this is super interesting. And the ecological degradation that is happening in the 19th century in this context, in this area, what you see is growth because of the lack of growingly shrinking resources, is the growth of first national pride and then ethnic hostility, and then by the 1920s, when the political situation is very bad, straightforward racism about the feud over environmental resources. We know how to manage these lands. We're the masters. But no, because of the political changes, they're not the masters anymore. Someone else is controlling those areas. Someone else is controlling those lands. You are not the masters. And that sense of loss of power and control, what I see in the stories that I'm reading, is really making people not just bitter, but very aggressive. And instead of, I'll wait with this. I just go ahead. I don't say this first. I just go forward. Okay, so let's talk about the modernization. Let's talk about reclamation. So on the left side, you see this land, the bottom of the bathtub, the pusta, where everyone is eating paprika every day. There's a lot of permanently flooded areas or temporarily flooded areas, especially along the river on the right, and that is the river Tisa. It doesn't matter really, but that's the big regulation project that unfolds in the 19th century. Because this area, there's about, the reclaimed area is almost 50,000 square kilometers, so that's bigger than the Netherlands that they reclaim. So that's a huge project. It's and this is the country that is existing after the modernization. And what is happening, they are making the same cuts, like that we talked about with the case of the Rhine. You know, it's curly, and then they're just making the cut right there. So what is happening, that up in the hills, all those minorities, they have their own goals, right? What do they want? They want more land, they want to till the land, they want more access to forest, they want to have their own piece of the modernization process. They want to have their own cut from this modernization that is going on, not just the people in the center. So because of the deforestation works that has been accelerating by the end of the 19th century, what you see is more floods. More floods is happening, more floods are going on. And then at the meantime, you have this vast river regulation works right in the heart of this area. So the rivers are regulated. And because of that, now the rivers are faster, and so the floods are becoming, the floods are going downstream faster, and then the devastation is bigger. And this is the moment where I would like to halt. I think this is a very powerful moment. So you have all that fear that the next flood is going to come. So this is a middle-sized city completely destroyed in 1879, somewhere downstream. You have all the fear that the next flood is coming. You have all the fear that the people who are living upstream, they're in the same country, but they're kind of foreign agents. This is the discourse that we are seeing. They are living in our country, right? But then they are like doing all those things that's good for them. They're working against us. In this, it's our land. We are controlling the entire land, but this is not what's happening. And so I think the very powerful thing with the discussions is that instead of revisiting the problem, why is this deforestation going on? Why are the floods are worsening? Do we need river regulation? Do we need the modernization works that we have been carrying out and causing this kind of destruction? These questions are not even emerging. I mean, they're emerging on the margin, on the sides. But the mainstream discourse is that we need to go strong. We need to build up bigger levees. We need to carry out the modernization fully. We need to do this project with more money, with more machinery, with more people. We need to go big. And then we will have bigger, and then we will have total control over all these environmental matters that are acting around us. Then we will control the entire bathtub perfectly. And I think that is a very frightening idea. When you see all those scientists, the foresters, the hydrologists, having a discussion with politicians and businessmen and putting forward their ideas, their scientific theories, and claiming that we can solve this. I have a fix. You take this pill, and then everything will be fine. We will do this with our rivers, and then the problem will be gone. It will gone forever. And this is exactly what's happening. The problem will be gone, but not forever, for some time. And so what is happening, and this is why, again, this area is super interesting to me, because it is really a model area of so many ecological problems. It is one of the worst affected areas of secondary salinization, of desertification, of land erosion, and floods, of course. Just the floods are now bigger and worse, but that's a different story. So there is a fix for every problem from a scientist's perspective, and we will build the bigger levees, we will build the bigger dams, and we will be protected. Our people will be protected forever. But that's not true. There's going to be just bigger floods, and the devastation will be bigger. And now you have reclaimed all that land, all the beautiful, large pieces of land, and now you want to use them. There is new cities, new towns, new businesses, but the ecological conditions are changing, and this is not climate change. This is not yet, that vast scale. This is just the 19th century. What you see is a water level drop. So now you cannot even maintain the crops that could be maintained before the regulation without further help. And that further help is irrigation. So you build a vast network, thousands of kilometers of irrigation canals that could be very easily sustained from the big rivers, right, in the bathtub. So now the bathtub is all the way with these irrigation canals all over the way to sustain the agriculture production, the agricultural powerhouse, the business, the state in this area. But then, so you solve this problem, huh? It's great. And then there is always a reaction to that, and there is secondary salinization and desertification. These are the two big problems that Hungary has been facing, which of course is producing new opportunities. Now there is a number of new species that could be harvested in Hungary. So my parents have a fig tree, and I don't know what's next. Maybe they will have a banana soon. So there is new opportunities, but the landscape has been totally changed, totally engineered, completely re-engineered, and then new ecological problems were created that were not revisited, not questioned in a way that why are we having this? Is this our making? Maybe we should do something about it. No, we need to seek bigger control. We need to seek a larger control, and there's a new fix every time the new problem emerges. And I still have some time, which is great, because I want to talk about an era that has been very much the heart of my research, and it's the era of the total control or total influence of scientists. I'm not sure how much you know about socialism, but often socialism is not identified very much as a democratic idea, right? It's about a very strong state control, and the state is claiming and trying to be the largest, most important actor. But what socialism and communism were about also is the belief, kind of like a blind belief in the role and the sway of experts in science. And landscape engineering, I think it's one of the greatest examples of that. It's so much power laid in the hands of experts, not just in Hungary. What I'm going to tell about, it could be repeated in the Soviet context, also in the Czechoslovak context or the East German context. And here we have to divide two things. One of the things is that the theory of communist and socialist science, it's actually a pretty beautiful theory. It's a theory that most of us would agree. It's a theory that sounds very well. It could be put into marketing slogans. I mean, maybe Coca-Cola would kill for those slogans, or any other multinational company. And there is the reality. This is very different from those slogans. So what most of the Soviet scientists and communist scientists understood, that human nature interactions were part of one complex system. They, in theory, most of them understood the human agents, scientists, the state, state-owned businesses, whatever, municipalities, equal to the natural conditions. More so, what they said, that the natural conditions are not just equal, but they come first. I mean, this is pretty much common sense, right? There has been a globe before humans appeared on it, so that's not anything new. But what they say is that the ecological conditions are very difficult to get to know. Like, our science is very good, we are the best. America sucks. We communists, we are the best. But even with this best science, yeah, I know, this is what they thought. Even with this best communist science, we are not capable to understand the complex ecosystems, the complex systems of the complex natural systems. This is the word that they use, the complex natural systems. So in a way, the communist scientists would have very much agreed, and actually did agree with Rachel Carson. So first, this is just like a bracket, like a story inside a story. Rachel Carson's reception was very bad first in the communist countries. They were like saying the same stuff, like mostly men, this is nonsense. But it took a few years, and they realized in the early 1970s, so less than 10 years after the publication, and there was no internet, so there was like a French, they probably couldn't access the English original most of the time, so there was a French translation, and that they could access. So it took some years, and then they realized, not only the scientists, but based on the scientists, the political decision makers, that Rachel Carson's theories can be very much capitalized in a communist context, because Rachel Carson is saying a lot of things that the communist scientists are saying in theory, like not in practice. And this is exactly what happened. And actually in the Hungarian context, there is a Hungarian Rachel Carson who wrote a very different tone, very similar tone to Rachel Carson about ecological damage and change. But yeah, you could say that this was also political against the West. Okay, so instead of looking at these Western science fixes, say the communist scientists, we don't need to bother with those. I mean, yeah, but really what we need to do is to have this holistic system, and this holistic system is that we try to understand complex natural systems, which we will never understand. We know, we're just humans. But we try to understand them, and we aim to design our society that it's not interfering with those systems. So in theory, in communist landscape planning, like to put it like to a very ground level, there is no national parks, because you don't need a national park. There is no like industrial district, because it's not about, it's complex, it's the whole thing. We will plan our society, our industry, our urban areas in a way that they are coexisting with nature. We will coexist. We are communist. We're the best people. We can make it. We will coexist with nature. I think it's beautiful. Well, none of it became true, but it's a wonderful idea, and I would love to live in that utopia. Yeah, it's just the same thing. Like, I have to speed up a very little bit, so I just So these are technocrats. These are communist technocrats, and this is what communist technocrats say in '54. That's 1 year after Stalin died. Is the worst repression in Hungary. I remember my family members telling stories about that. My grandfather was imprisoned at that time because of stupid political reasons. It's a really harsh repression of a time. But this is what this technocrat says, communist scientist. Quotations of the water economy do not include laws of nature. Hungarian Rachel Carson in '54. These quotations were established based on a very, very small amount of human observation and measurement. We are nothing. It would be a naive philosophy to think that quotations produced by the human brain could be forced upon nature. Stalinist, communist, hydrologist. Very nice. Well done, Kalman. Well done. Right, same ideas. It's just very similar ideas. Yeah, but complex planning and industrial complexes and industrial symbiosis. They had this very elaborate theoretical talk, theoretical discussions in the 60s about zero waste economy and industry. They had a master plan to build every new socialist housing areas from the 1970s with total recycling. Like all these beautiful ideas. None of it came true, so don't worry. Like, I'm not gonna change history and tell you that it happened. So reality was very different, obviously. And there were a heck of a lot of problems, which we will skip. But this was reality. This was reality. Increased waste production. Yeah. And political protests. Okay. Just skip these, and yes. So, we have arrived to what happened in the past. And as you could see, environmental humanities and environmental history do not offer any solutions and fixes. if I can share my personal perspective, I am very anti-fix and anti-solution. I don't think there is solutions and fixes. And I have a video about it online, so maybe I just link it to Moodle about the fixes. It's a very short video. History tells us that there is no fixes. There's no easy fix. There's no solutions. There is solutions, but there's going to be always a side effect, always, that we do not foresee. No matter how good science we have or we believe we have, there's going to be always something that we do not calculate. We miscalculate. We do not take into account. We do not understand. So in that respect, the communist scientists, they knew something. The one thing they knew right, that they didn't know much. And I think that's a very good observation. So I love this image. This is pretty much what I think we might be doing. And in the coming few minutes, I would like to talk a little bit about a book I like. This is the last book I'm recommending. Have you heard about this? Ernst Callenbach, Ecotopia? Maybe some of you. I read it as a teenager. It was translated to Hungarian in '92. And I read it in '93 or '94, and it just blew my mind. Although it's very much American in so many ways, and it's very much grounded in the Pacific Northwest, like alternative. Like, have you been to Oregon or Northern California? You know, the kind of, you know, the hippies and all that. It was written in the late 1960s, so there is a lot of marijuana and the liberal. Sexual conduct and, you know, all those things that were associated with the hippie movement. But the one thing that is very important, I think, in this book is that there is technology in this ecotopian society, but that technology is very selective. It's not, and it's not without questions. It is not without reservations. And I think this has been speaking to me in a way as history did, because it's maybe a lesson that is kind of going to the same direction, which is a difficult question. Like, is there a time we have to go back, or was there like a stage in economic development or technological development that was more ideal than the present? All these are not per se very accurate questions, but I like this book, and I would like to recommend it to you to read it. I'm sure it's available in Finland too, because it provokes questions about our future in the same way that I think historical lessons do. What do we need? What is necessary? And what is adequate or a responsible response to certain situations that probably would be said challenges, because that's more trendy.